Okay, I'm sat here today with David, with Jeff, talking about paganism, and that's been very interesting. We've talked already about a lot of aspects of paganism. The question I had next was, you've been practicing pagans for an amount of years that I won't reveal, but quite a few. What, over that period of time, have you seen alter, either in general terms in the pagan community, or in terms of just how you perceive it yourself? How has it shifted up to 2014, where we find ourselves today?
I've been in paganism and witchcraft for, well, over 25 years, and I've seen a lot of changes, both within the way I perceive it, and then also in the general environment. When I started in paganism, it was a small group of people who got together sort of quietly and without anyone knowing. I remember over in Stroud, whenever we used to get together, they used to put notice on the door going, the British Folklore Society. Because they couldn't have to say...
Big signs to the witches.
Yes, you couldn't put a sign up going witches.
Which is kind of interesting, because actually it was still at the time, I mean, you actually went to Alex Saunders' funeral.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was just after that whole big, well, maybe not just after, but it was after the, you know, the 60s and 70s, and there was actually quite a lot of media interest in the fact that
it was much more of a sensationalist media interest.
Sort of news of the world and all
and
that.
then, well, now we're in a position where we can no longer be sacked from our jobs because we're pagans. You know, we have these things we can go to.
Supposed to officially be able to get Sabbats off as
Special
religious
holidays.
holidays.
Yes, we have religious holidays. I mean, regularly, if you go to probably any stone circle around the country, you'll find a group of pagans doing something, usually something public that often they'll allow other people to join in. I suppose for me, one of the big things is you can walk into any bookshop and buy a book on paganism, buy a book on witchcraft, druidry, any of the religions that come under the pagan umbrella. When I started, you had none of that.
Well, when you started, there was the one bookshop.
There was a little bookshop that you went and you were actually introduced to the man who owned the
private bookshop in someone's basement. And you weren't allowed in unless you did a special handshake and he knew the person.
Yeah, well, I think every town, certainly in the 90s, had a bookshop hidden away somewhere. And I can remember the one in Leicester, and you know, there were various cities where there'd be a little bookshop somewhere.
Yes.
Some back street where you could find different books, alternative. But even then, the selection was very poor, and it could be very kind of.
There wasn't that much published. I mean,
No.
Exactly.
When I started, the only thing that had been published was, well, you know, was Gardner's own original. There was a very dubious biography of Alex by the News of the World, and then there was the Farrars, you know, 3 books by the Farrars, and actually, Vivian Crowley had just brought out the Wicca, the New Age, the old religion in the New Age. Hello. So, and from there to there's a huge publisher, you know, massive on everything. As well, actually, in some ways, that's fantastic because it does mean that you're no longer, you know, you don't necessarily throw it out in conversation at the bus stop or by the way, hi, I'm a witch, you know, but. You know, there isn't that much. You won't get that. Oh my God, you're a devil worshipper.
Yes.
The flip side of that actually tends to be that, in fact, what you tend to get is that everybody seems to think that they know what paganism is or they know what witchcraft is. Not so much now, but you know, certainly 5-10 years ago. If you said you were Wicca, you know, it's what you mean, like in Buffy. You know, that
of course, yes, or whatever kind of cultural.
But I think at the same time, programs on television like that have actually gone to make paganism a much more accepted thing. I mean, I think the other big thing that has been a big factor in the way that witchcraft has changed is the onset of the internet. You know, when I started in witchcraft, there was no internet. Now we have this thing that, well, if you want to know what ritual you can do at your next full moon or your next Sabbath, you can look on the internet.
You can watch it on YouTube and...
Exactly, you know, so there are endless, you know, you can find clips of Alex Saunders, you can find clips of Gerald Gardner on YouTube, on the internet. So these things that, when I started, I never had access to. Someone now who's interested in paganism, interested in ritual, can look at these things, they can explore more of it for themselves.
Actually, what's interesting is earlier talking about community and how actually that on some aspects, paganism can sound like that it's all about oneself and improving oneself. And actually, it's not. It should be much more about community and working either within the magical community, but also within the wider community. And actually, that's one of the things that the internet has really done. It's actually what I did my master's research on, was actually looking at the way that in the early days, just after we'd had the World Wide Web, it was actually looking at what has now become social media, and how were pagans and witches using the emerging social media as ways of being able to make connections. And it was seeing that kind of just explode, Facebook pages and everything. And it really is about actually, maybe not so much now, but certainly a good 10 years ago, what the internet meant was that I was talking in my research with people who were witches in small towns in Texas and in the Bible Belt and stuff, who knew no other witches and pagans at all and thought that they were some kind of weird person who had to hide everything in case they got burnt.
So one of the aspects of the internet is that if someone has a religion that's not accepted or widespread in their area, they feel like they're the only witch in the village or whatever, in the Bible Belt or whatever. Yes. They can suddenly become part of this global network. Yeah. And actually, I think emerging religions and some established religions were some of the most enthusiastic users of early browsers and those early internet chat forums and all those things that we've now forgotten because it's also easy on our phones and things.
And I think the other thing is that it also allowed people who were just stuck in their little village to suddenly realise actually just down the road there was a pub and once a month someone held a pagan moon there. Because
in the old days you never knew.
Well, in the old days,
exactly.
So that's opened up a lot.
And do you think that's had a democratising effect on paganism itself, in the sense that there may have been a tendency, traditionally in the past, for people to be slightly cliquey, slightly exclusivist, or some groups of people not to want to let other people in, and now they can't do it anymore? It's harder to.
That in itself is kind of one of the being elders in one of the initiatory traditions, and actually being on various specialist closed invite-only websites and stuff like that are for elders and third degrees and stuff like that. You can only get in if you've got a voucher and all this kind of stuff. And actually on those lists there is very regularly the whole kind of discussion of these modern day eclectic witches who have no idea what they're talking about. It wasn't like this in my day. And, there's all this kind of, you shouldn't be allowed to study this unless you did this and you did that and you've gone through that process and you know this person. And it's kind of interesting because it is kind of, you're kind of trying to hold back the tide here. It's not going to work. And, particularly because potentially you're doing it on the basis of a tradition or traditional ideas that were based on an old history, and based on an old way of doing it, that we did it like that originally because it was this scary process and you didn't want people knowing and all that kind of thing.
But at the same time, I think the eclectic movement has really opened up the pagan movement. It has allowed anybody who has realised they need to get back to that cycle of the year, need the rhythm within their body to match the rhythm within the earth cycle, that turn of the year that we celebrate. It means that people who have that urge don't have to seek out a specialist group. They can actually go, this seems to be what people are doing, I'm going to go out and do that, or I'm going to go to that stone circle and meet those people because they seem to be doing it and they're saying come along.
So at a level that you're comfortable with, because there's that, and then it's kind of, this is working, so I'll research it further, and then there's also that possibility of being able to go, I'd like to join a group, so where I was in groups, here's a group, there's several groups, I'll go and talk to them.
Yes, but I think what it's also allowed is it's allowed people who have abandoned Christianity, who've abandoned regular religion, to actually go, I know I've abandoned my religion, but I still have a spiritual need. And that spiritual need I'm finding in the land, in the cycle of the year. Again, we come back to that point of on the heath, the heathens. And that it has allowed more people to join and become pagans by it being more open. And I think that has been a good thing.
And I think, although the census data is complicated because it's to do with how many people are happy to, but I think it's probably not that controversial to say that paganism has seen in the last 20 years a very substantial rise in this country and in many European countries and beyond in numbers. So and it's probably because of the nature of it and the nature of the kind of history, quite a young religion in terms of that average age. If you go to many traditional churches, the average age of a member is probably quite high, and many pagan communities, the average age is probably very young. There's a lot of teenagers, a lot of young people who've discovered it. So I wonder how that's going to change things, to have this sudden kind of like almost like a baby boom, but a teen boom, or people in their 20s to suddenly kind of feel that they're in the majority within religion. And they have this democratised access to information. That means that we're going to see quite an interesting decade ahead of us in terms of where paganism goes next, I presume.
Yes, I suppose. But at the same time, there is still within paganism there is that reverence, if that's the right word, for the idea of tradition, the idea of the elder, the idea of the wise one, of the crone figure. So there's always still, there's always that kind of tension, but there is still that idea of, I want to talk to someone who's been doing it for longer, I want to talk to someone who possibly knows what they are doing in their practice that I can possibly learn from in order to be able to develop my own practice.
But then that's just the great way the community is built. People do what they do. Young people may come into paganism, and then they meet older people who are within paganism, who begin to develop community, and community is one of those things that's so important within.
Well, what I mean is it kind of balances out that. Oh my God, it's just going to be.
It's not just going to be a
lots of young people who don't know what they're doing, because it's kind of, well, actually no. There's always going to be that element of the previous generation
will
kind
help
of
to things. I also think that it's a good thing that a lot of young people are coming into paganism. It means that young people are also finding a sense of their own spiritual place within the world. And I think spirituality is an important thing to us all, particularly when it's not surrounded by dogma and doctrine, when it is something that's a lot more free. I was young once, I can remember being free and experimental, and I think that's why it's good, things that I'm doing now because of when I was young and first beginning to practice paganism and witchcraft, I was experimental. I actually hope there are young people now who are experimental and exploring ideas.
And doing all the stuff that they were told, no, you're not. Oh, do that.
But and discovering new and wonderful ideas for themselves. Discovering and creating new philosophies for themselves that will carry them forward. Particularly if within the foundation of what they're doing is something that is good and is based on community and is based on taking time out. And taking time out of your hectic day and your hectic life just to pause for a minute and just to go, wow, look what a lovely sunrise, or gosh, it's time now when the light and day are in perfect balance. And it's just being able to take that moment where you push everything else away and go, this is something that is spiritual, that is a little sacred moment. And then it kind of almost gives you healing to be able to go back out into the hecticness of our everyday lives. And I think it's as important for us as an older generation, but it's also important for younger people who are coming in.
There's actually something that we say as part of the initiatory process when you actually make a new witch in the initiatory tradition, where actually there is a whole thing that is said over the new witch, but effectively what it says is you as a new person with fresh eyes and as a new baby witch, as it were, you actually bring more value to the craft than I, as being the old person who's initiated you. Because what you bring is you bring life, you bring new vision, you bring new ideas, and actually through you, the craft will grow. And it's the same idea.
That's a lovely, optimistic, upbeat, kind of youthful note on which to stop. Thank you.